There comes a point when you stop begging to be understood and start choosing your peace instead. That's emotional detachment, not coldness, but clarity. It's the moment you stop reacting, stop chasing, and start reclaiming your power. Because the truth is, he doesn't feel your absence when you leave. He feels it when you stop giving him emotional access to you. Emotional detachment isn't about shutting your heart off or pretending you never cared. It's not about becoming numb or acting like what happened didn't affect you. It's about reaching a level of peace within yourself where his behavior no longer dictates your emotional state. You stop living in reaction to his moods, his messages, his silence. You begin to see things clearly, not through the lens of attachment, but through the lens of truth. That's what clarity feels like. It's when your emotions stop running the show and your self-worth finally takes the lead. When you're deeply emotionally invested in someone who's inconsistent or emotionally unavailable, it's easy to mistake your reactions for connection. You think, if I care this much, it must mean something real, but caring doesn't always equal compatibility. Sometimes it just means you've been conditioned to equate emotional chaos with depth. Emotional detachment breaks that illusion. It helps you step outside the storm and see what's really happening. You begin to realize that the love you thought you were protecting was really your need to be chosen. You weren't fighting for him, you were fighting to prove your worth through him. Detaching emotionally gives you back your power. Because when you're emotionally entangled, he has it. Every time you check your phone hoping he'll text, every time you rehearse what you'll say if he reaches out, every time you overthink why he pulled away again, you're giving tiny pieces of yourself away. But when you detach, that power starts returning home. You stop reacting to every little thing he does, and instead, you observe it for what it is, data. His actions become information, not personal attacks. You stop internalizing his behavior as a reflection of your value. And that's when you start to heal. The truth is, clarity is often painful at first. When you detach, you begin to see the situation for what it actually was, not what you hoped it could be. You start noticing the patterns, the excuses, the way you were settling for crumbs and calling it love. But that pain is necessary because it burns away the illusion. It clears the fog that emotional attachment created. Suddenly, you can see reality in high definition, and even though it hurts, it's also freeing, because now you can make decisions from strength, not fear. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you start caring about yourself more. You protect your peace, your time, and your emotional energy as if they're sacred because they are. You stop chasing validation from someone who's incapable of giving it, and you start giving yourself the love you were begging for. That's the shift that changes everything. When you're detached, you can still love someone, but from a distance that protects your dignity. You can have empathy without losing yourself in someone else's chaos. People often think detachment is coldness, but it's actually compassion, just with boundaries. It's saying, I can see your pain, but I won't let it destroy my peace. It's refusing to keep bleeding for someone who never even noticed the cuts. And ironically, it's in that calm detachment that your presence becomes the most powerful, because the energy that once flowed toward them now radiates back to you. You glow differently when your peace is no longer up for negotiation, and that's when the tables turn. Because he'll feel that shift, the moment you stop reacting, the moment you stop trying to prove your worth, he'll sense that emotional distance. Not because you're trying to make him notice, but because energy never lies. The very peace that once seemed so far away becomes the thing he misses most. You're no longer his emotional anchor, and that void will echo louder than your words ever did. Emotional detachment isn't revenge, it's rebalance. It's you finally realizing that your heart was never the problem. It just needed to stop bleeding for someone who didn't know how to hold it. When you were emotionally invested, he could always feel it. He could feel it in the way you waited for his messages, the way your tone shifted when he went distant, the way your mood depended on whether he gave you attention or withheld it. He knew he had a certain pull over you, an invisible power that made him feel relevant, important, even irreplaceable. And that's exactly why your emotional detachment hits harder than any goodbye ever could. Because when he can no longer control how you feel, he loses the very thing that kept him comfortable, your emotional response. For a man who's used to your energy feeding his ego, your detachment becomes unsettling. He was never addicted to your presence. He was addicted to your reaction. The reassurance that no matter how much he pulled away, you'd still care, still chase, still be affected. Your emotions were his proof that he mattered. When you detach, you take that proof away. You stop giving him the satisfaction of knowing he can still impact you. That silence, that stillness, that indifference, it unnerves him, because now he can't read you, can't predict you, can't feel the power he once had. At first, he might think you're pretending. He'll test it. Maybe send a casual text, a memory, or a just checking in message to see if the old emotional version of you still exists. But when he sees you don't respond with the same intensity, when your tone is calm, short, detached, he starts to feel something he didn't before: loss. Not the loss of a relationship, but the loss of influence. He no longer has the ability to shake your world, and that's when it starts to shake his. Because your emotional energy was his mirror, it reflected his worth back to him. Every time you cared, comforted, or explained, you were validating him, showing him he still mattered. When you detach, that mirror disappears. Now he's left alone with himself, forced to face the emptiness he's been avoiding. He begins to realize that the power he thought he had wasn't real. It only existed because you kept giving it to him. Without your reaction, he's exposed. Without your energy, he feels invisible, and that's what truly hurts him. Emotional detachment doesn't happen overnight. It's a quiet shift, a decision made after too many second chances, too many tears, too many nights spent trying to understand someone who never tried to understand you. But once that shift happens, it's irreversible. You no longer get pulled into the same cycles. You see his mixed signals for what they are: manipulation, not mystery. You recognize his silence as disinterest, not depth. You stop giving him the emotional fuel he thrives on. And in doing so, you starve the dynamic that once drained you. What's powerful about detachment is that it's not loud, it's internal. You don't need to announce that you're done. Your energy says it for you. You stop explaining yourself. You stop defending your decisions. You simply move differently. He'll feel the distance even if you never speak another word. Because emotional detachment is energy withdrawal, and energy is what he's always been addicted to. And here's the irony: when you finally stop caring in the same way, that's when he starts to. Because now, for the first time, your value isn't tied to his control. He starts remembering your warmth, your consistency, your presence. But it's too late. The version of you that once overgave is gone. You've evolved into someone he can no longer reach emotionally, no matter how hard he tries. That's when he truly feels it, not when you walk away, but when your heart already has. Because the absence of your energy is louder than your presence ever was, and he'll realize too late that the real power wasn't in your reactions, it was always in your ability to take them back. Silence has a way of speaking louder than any words ever could. When you stop explaining yourself, when you stop trying to make him understand how his actions hurt you, that silence becomes deafening. It's not just the absence of noise, it's the presence of clarity. You've reached the point where you realize that repeating yourself won't change anything, that no amount of words will make someone suddenly value what they've been taking for granted. And that realization is powerful because silence isn't weakness. It's emotional detachment in its purest form. For so long, you explained how his distance made you feel unwanted. You explained why you needed consistency, honesty, and effort. You tried to show him your heart, thinking that if he just understood it, he'd meet you there. But instead, your words fell on deaf ears. Every time you explained, he grew more comfortable ignoring, because as long as you were still talking, still pleading, still reacting, he knew he still had your heart. You were still emotionally engaged, still tethered to him by hope. But the day you stop explaining, that's the day everything changes. That's when he realizes something's different. Your silence becomes his mirror. It reflects back everything he didn't want to see. His neglect, his indifference, his lack of effort. When you stop defending your worth, he's left alone with the truth of his behavior. The absence of your words forces him to hear his own. The absence of your reaction forces him to sit with the discomfort he's been avoiding, and that's when regret begins to take root, not because you left, but because you finally stopped trying. Silence has weight, it lingers, it makes him question things he used to take for granted. He wonders if you've met someone else, if you've moved on, or worse, if you've truly stopped caring. And that uncertainty is something his ego can't handle, because before, your emotions fed his confidence. Your explanations reassured him that no matter how distant he became, you'd still be there. But when you go quiet, you take that reassurance away. You stop giving him the emotional comfort he used to depend on. Your silence becomes a consequence, not a tactic. What he doesn't realize at first is that your silence isn't meant to punish him, it's meant to protect you. You've simply reached a level of peace where your words no longer serve you. You don't need to convince anyone of your value anymore. You've said enough, tried enough, given enough. Now your calm says what your words never could. I've outgrown this. And that calmness is unsettling for him because he can't manipulate it. You've taken back the one thing he relied on most, your emotional availability. The silence that once scared you becomes your freedom. You realize you don't need closure from him. You've already given it to yourself. You don't need to be understood. You just need to be at peace. The conversations you used to crave no longer matter, because the person you were trying to reach no longer exists in your life. You begin to understand that sometimes silence is the most self-respecting answer you can give. It's not giving up, it's moving on without needing permission. And that's what he feels most, the finality of it. Words could always be debated, misunderstood, or ignored. But silence leaves no room for misinterpretation. It's absolute. It tells him, without ever saying a thing, that he no longer has access to your emotions. That your heart has closed the door he kept walking through carelessly, and that realization cuts deeper than any argument ever could. In the end, your silence becomes the loudest message he'll ever receive, because it tells him everything without telling him anything. It says, "You had my voice when you didn't value it. Now you'll live with the quiet that comes after it." And that quiet, that's where he finally starts to feel the weight of everything he took for granted. Detachment is often misunderstood as indifference, but in truth, it's one of the highest forms of emotional maturity. It's not about not caring, it's about caring differently. It's about reaching a point where you can love someone deeply and still recognize that holding on is hurting you more than letting go ever could. Emotional detachment doesn't come from coldness, it comes from clarity. It's the understanding that peace is worth more than temporary attention, and self-respect is worth more than a love that makes you question your worth. There's a version of you that tried everything. You explained, compromised, waited, forgave, and hoped. You gave love in every language you knew. You kept trying to meet him halfway, even when he refused to move an inch. But at some point, you realize that you can't fix a relationship that only you're fighting for. You can't make someone see your value if they're determined to overlook it. That realization is painful. It feels like grief, because emotional detachment doesn't happen in anger, it happens in acceptance. It's when your heart finally catches up to what your mind has known for a while. This isn't love anymore, it's exhaustion. When you detach, you're not abandoning love, you're choosing yourself within it. You stop trying to change someone who doesn't want to grow. You stop waiting for them to meet you where you've already been standing. You start prioritizing your emotional health over the need to be understood. That's not giving up, it's growing up, because real maturity isn't about holding on the longest. It's about knowing when it's time to stop losing yourself in the process. Detachment gives you back your emotional balance. When you're no longer hooked on someone's approval or reaction, you find a quiet strength inside yourself. You no longer ride the roller coaster of their moods, their attention, their inconsistency. You become grounded. You realize that love isn't meant to be chaos. It's not supposed to leave you anxious, waiting, or questioning your worth every day. Love, when it's real, brings peace, not confusion. The beautiful part about detachment is that it brings perspective. You begin to see the situation as it really was, not as you hoped it could be. You see how much energy you poured into keeping something alive that wasn't reciprocating the same effort. You recognize that the version of love you were chasing was built more on potential than on reality. That's when you start to feel a shift. You stop missing him and start missing your own peace. You stop craving his attention and start craving your own calm. When you reach that level of detachment, your world doesn't fall apart. It realigns. You start rediscovering parts of yourself that got lost in the relationship. Your joy, your focus, your confidence. You begin to understand that you don't need chaos to feel connection. You learn that love doesn't have to come with suffering. And that realization changes everything about the kind of energy you allow into your life. He may not understand this version of you, the one who doesn't react, doesn't chase, doesn't argue. He might call it cold or distant, but it's not distance, it's discipline. You've learned that emotional peace is the highest form of self-love. That protecting your heart doesn't make you unloving, it makes you wise. And here's the irony, when you finally detach, that's when he begins to feel it. Because he was used to the version of you who gave endlessly, who explained, who fought for him, but now you've stopped fighting. You've stopped trying to prove, and that quiet confidence, the calm after the storm, becomes louder than any words you could ever say. Detachment isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of self-respect. It's the moment you stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself. He was never addicted to you in the way you hoped he would be. He was addicted to your energy, the way you made him feel about himself, the way your emotions fed his sense of importance, the way your attention filled the empty spaces inside him. He didn't always value you, but he valued what your presence gave him. Every time you chased him, forgave him, or over-explained yourself, you were feeding his ego. He got used to that nourishment, to the certainty that no matter what he did, your heart would still orbit around him. But when you finally pull that energy back, when you no longer give him the emotional fuel he once depended on, that's when he begins to starve. Energy is the invisible currency in every relationship. It's not the words you say, but the emotional effort behind them. It's the care, the empathy, the patience, the love, and for so long you gave yours freely, without realizing that he wasn't reciprocating. He was consuming your energy like a man who never planned to refill the well. You thought your consistency would make him stay, instead it made him complacent. Because when someone is constantly fed emotionally, they stop appreciating the source. They forget that the love they're consuming requires effort, presence, and respect to sustain. When you finally detach, you stop being his emotional supplier. You stop checking in when he goes quiet. You stop reacting when he plays distant. You stop explaining what he already knows but refuses to change. That withdrawal of energy hits him harder than any confrontation ever could. Because for the first time, he feels the weight of your absence not physically, but emotionally. He feels the void where your validation used to live. And he realizes that what made him feel powerful wasn't his control over you. It was your willingness to keep showing up, even when he didn't deserve it. What he once took for granted now becomes painfully scarce. Your empathy, your effort, your warmth, all the things that once felt like constants suddenly disappear. He tries to reach for the old dynamic, but it's gone. The version of you that gave endlessly no longer exists. You've learned that energy is sacred, that who you invest in determines how peaceful or painful your life becomes. And once that awareness sets in, you stop giving to people who only take. You stop pouring into hands that never pour back. You stop confusing effort with love. The irony is, he'll start to miss the very things he dismissed. He'll miss your check-ins, your laughter, your emotional depth. He'll scroll through your messages or old photos trying to reconnect with a version of you he no longer has access to. But what he doesn't understand is that once you reclaim your energy, you can't go back to the same place you lost it. You've changed, you've grown, and the peace that comes with detachment is far more intoxicating than the chaos he offered. Your energy was his comfort, his validation, his mirror. Without it, he's forced to sit with himself, and that's where the discomfort begins. Because now he has to face what your energy once distracted him from, his own emptiness. He realizes that all the attention he demanded was never about love, it was about control. He doesn't miss you because he suddenly knows how to love. He misses the feeling of being important in your world. But you've learned something powerful. The moment you stop feeding someone's ego, you stop starving your soul. You see that not everyone deserves your emotional generosity, that your energy is a privilege, not a guarantee. And once you redirect that energy toward yourself, toward your healing, your growth, your peace, everything changes. You stop attracting people who drain you and start attracting people who match you. So yes, he feels it when you detach. Not because he suddenly loves differently, but because the energy that once kept him inflated has been cut off. And what's left is silence, the kind that forces reflection, because now he knows the truth. He didn't just lose you. He lost access to the one thing he never appreciated, your energy. Detaching emotionally doesn't just create distance, it creates revelation. When you pull your energy back, something profound happens. He starts to see the difference between attention and connection, between control and love. He realizes that the connection he thought he had with you was never about depth. It was about his ability to elicit emotion from you. The more he could make you react, whether through affection or frustration, the more powerful he felt. But now, when your emotions no longer orbit around him, he begins to feel the emptiness of that illusion. Because true connection can't survive when only one person is emotionally investing. And he starts to see that all along. It was you holding the bond together. There's a shift that happens when your energy no longer responds to his behavior. The same tactics that once pulled you back in, his charm, his silence, his sudden bursts of attention, stop working. You don't chase anymore. You don't seek closure. You don't overthink his mixed signals, and that quiet composure becomes the loudest message of all. It tells him something words never could. You've healed from the need to be chosen by someone who couldn't see your value. That kind of peace disarms him, because he's no longer in control of how you feel. The power dynamic flips, not through revenge, but through release. It's easy to think detachment is about punishing him, but it's not. It's about liberating yourself from the cycle of emotional dependency. It's about no longer needing his validation to confirm your worth. For so long, you might have believed that if you explained more, cared harder, or stayed longer, he'd finally understand your love. But now you see that people don't change because of how much you feel for them. They change when they're confronted with what life feels like without you. And nothing confronts a man's ego more deeply than realizing that the person he once took for granted no longer needs him to feel whole. When your energy detaches, he's left with the silence he created. No more reassurance, no more emotional safety net, no more predictable access to your compassion. And in that silence, he begins to feel the weight of what he's lost, not your presence, but your peace, your loyalty, your emotional warmth. Because love like yours isn't something that disappears. It just stops being available to those who mishandled it. You didn't stop caring. You just stopped offering your care to someone who didn't respect it. And that difference is what creates the deepest impact. He may try to reach out again, not always because he wants to rekindle love, but because he misses the comfort of your energy. He misses being understood without having to explain himself, being forgiven without earning it. But when he returns to find you grounded, detached, and calm, he realizes that his influence no longer penetrates your peace. You've become untouchable, not because you're cold, but because you've outgrown the version of yourself that accepted crumbs and called it love. That realization humbles him. It reminds him that your silence isn't emptiness, it's self-respect. This stage of detachment is where your true power lies. It's not in trying to make him see what he lost, it's in knowing you don't need him to. You understand now that closure doesn't come from someone finally acknowledging your worth. It comes from you deciding that your peace is worth protecting. And that decision transforms everything about your energy. You move differently, you speak differently, you attract differently. You no longer need to chase validation because you've built it within yourself. He'll feel that shift more deeply than you'll ever know, because the woman who once gave everything has now learned to give selectively. The woman who once explained has now mastered silence. The woman who once tolerated uncertainty now demands emotional consistency. That evolution is what truly shakes him, not because you're gone, but because you've become someone who no longer revolves around him. And when a man finally sees that his presence no longer dictates your peace, that's when he feels it most. That's when he realizes he didn't just lose your love. He lost access to the part of you that made him feel significant. And that is a loss he won't easily forget. Detaching emotionally isn't about becoming heartless. It's about finally choosing peace over pain. It's the moment you stop fighting for someone who was never fighting for you and start protecting the energy that once held everything together. When you pull back, he'll feel it not because you've punished him, but because you've reclaimed yourself. The silence he once mistook for weakness now becomes your greatest strength, and that's when he realizes the love he took for granted was the very thing he can't replace.